So yeah, my name's France, and I I'd always known I was gay since I was little. Um, Probably 8, 9, 10 years old. But it's not something that you. I mean, you would hear people teasing you, and I guess because I played with kids my age, you know, that time we would play outside. I don't know if kids today are still doing that, but that was a thing then, right? Where there's a basketball court, kids would congregate, and so I played, the entire thing. And I guess Bayot was uh, something that gets around a lot. Regardless of whether you are or you're not, people would uh, throw that insult to demean someone, or if they would um, think that you're inferior to them or won't put up a fight, right? Sometimes it's in that context, na people, or ano, hindi mo malaban. Sige nga, sundukan nga kayo. Ayaw lumaban. And there are valid reasons why you wouldn't. My particular case was that I knew that the beating I would get from fist fights is nothing compared to the beating I would get from my parents, from my mom, right? Because she would always like, no fights, no fights, don't fight. Uh, so yeah, I always had that. I guess my brother and I always had that at the back of our minds. Um, but that's not to say that we didn't engage in fistfights, because we would, because kids. Um, but yeah, if you would back down from challenges, duels, uh, almost automatically, uh, you would get labeled as biot. So that's one part of it. But also, I noticed that I I fancied boys, uh, and at the time, I guess I didn't have the tools to communicate my feelings, or maybe I just didn't really care so much about that. I had other priorities, like maybe studying, helping at home, and all that. But it's always been something that I was cognizant of. Uh, and explored, I guess, in my later years as I was growing older.
But you said 8 or 9 when you
Yeah, yeah.
realized that you. And this is, again, this is something that I'm curious. I'm not sure if maybe you have really understood it from an early age or even now, but do you think it has something to do with the causes of it are more cultural rather than genetical?
Mm, so that's an interesting idea that you bring up, because there's a huge debate about that, obviously, right? Um, I didn't know about the science of it, the genetics of it, because I was young, and that's so much advanced science. At that age, the science that you learn about would be earth science and periodic tables and all that. I don't even remember uh, delving into neuroscience in high school. But the cultural aspect of it is definitely something that I was consciously aware of. One, I was surrounded by queer people, right? Uh, Tita Lenny, the lady I mentioned in my TED talk, was close with my mom, close with the ladies in the neighborhood. There were definitely other, trans or gay or queer individuals in our community, and it was not something that was looked down upon on, because they were, for example, part of festivities. If the moms of the neighborhood were gonna get together, maybe chica chica, like 4 p.m. With snacks and coke and all that. they were a part of that clique, so to say. So I didn't explicitly observe them being like outcasted, at least from the community that I grew up in. In my own family, I also really never. Well, I was gonna say I never felt like that was something to be shameful about, but then I gotta backtrack a bit because it's actually a little more complex than that. So my dad died early. My father figure was my uncle, who happens to be the eldest in my mom's side. There were 9 of them. So he was a military guy.
Right.
And I remember him policing, my actions. And I guess in that sense, I became conscious about how I should present myself when he's around. But on the other hand, my mom and my aunts and my Lola, very supportive. And I don't remember anything terrible or nasty, any nasty remarks from any of them. So there's that duality.
Uh-huh. And you said your uncle, right? Was your
Mhm.
father figure. So
Yes.
hanggang sa paglaki mo, he was the father figure na on your life.
Yes, that would be accurate. Well, he's one of many because there's several. Even the way it is in Filipino society is that everyone's an aunt, everyone's an uncle, right? Even if you're not
Right.
related by blood, by proximity. If your mom is close to someone, maybe their best friend, you call them aunt, you call them uncle, right? And so that's kind of how it was. The village raises the kids or the children. Everyone's looking after everybody, all the kids in the neighborhood, basically. So my uncle was one of the prominent father figures, I would say. And there's an interesting story about him actually, because I think he was okay with everything because I would say an academic achiever, right? And then now that I'm trying to remember things, I remember quite a lot of things actually about our interactions. So what it boils down to is that he was okay with every other facet of my being except for that. One of the things that he said, and this is in Bisaya, it was like, bisan pag unsa kadaghan nga mga medals imong dalon sa balay, di gihapon ko mobilid nimo. The implication being, if because you're gay or something like that, flamboyant or parang queer, you're not straight. Right. But there's a good ending to this because so my uncle died several years ago. But before he got really ill, I went back to Butuan and saw everybody, including him. And then I offered him a cigarette because I smoke. And it was like, he declined and he said, "Niundang nako, I stopped smoking." I was like, "Oh, wow, that's a change." And then he laughed and then he pulled me aside and he actually said, "Pasaylo ako sa mga tanan nga nabuhat na ako sa imo." And I was like, "Oh wow, okay," because I wasn't expecting all of that, because we hadn't seen each other since I went away for college, and then siguro that was a good 6-7 years because I was already starting to work when we saw each other. And then he was like, "I'm proud of you, blah blah blah, and I hope makalimutan na to nimo, blah blah blah." Tanan. I was like, "Cool, it's okay. Dugira na ako ikalimutan." And that was all in the past. I see that you're a changed man. You're parang you care so much about your family. Kay gagmay pa man yung mga bata. And then he said nga, palihog na ako kuan sa iya ka na, parang atiman or tanaw-tanaw sa akong mga anak. Bisag wala na ko. Something like that. And so there's a resolution naman when it comes to my relationship with my uncle.
Right, and it's good. Well, he made peace with that, and parang I guess it was always on his conscience, no, like that aspect. So you mentioned you started on this advocacy, no, but what got you more dedicated to your advocacy in terms of itong gender fluidity? Because in fact, you talked about this in your TED Talk. So what do you think is the reason behind that?
I can think of several, siguro. One is that I feel like once, if you're queer and you've settled into your identity and you're comfortable enough, I think there's a responsibility to give back, kumbaga, and try to make this world better than when you found it. There's people who have come before me who did that, and I think that responsibility sort of falls on my shoulder side. I mean, it falls on everyone's shoulders. But for me personally, I've gotten to that point in my life where I need to do something. Kumbaga, I need to speak up because I also had my fair share of years. Now I would not speak up. I would siguro sidestep a question. So there was one instance that I still remember to this day. I was new at work. Maybe a year into that, it was my first or second job, I think. And then one of the things that we would do is we would have these inuman sessions after work, and then people would talk, blah, blah, blah. And you know how it is. So there was one person who joined the company, and he was maybe 1 or 2 months into the job. And he was a little different, so to speak. And so one guy put him in the hot spot, and just flat out asked him if he's straight or if he's gay or it's not. Bayad ka dili, something like that, almost like taunting, and I remember just being on the side and not interjecting, not saying a thing. Mostly because I was still really also trying to find myself, and I wasn't that self-assured. But that stuck with me, and obviously I'm a different person now. I've learned, a lot since then, and so yeah, that sort of responsibility, now if you can, then speak up. If you see something that's not right, then for me, there's a responsibility to try and make it right. Kumbaga.
Yeah. So after that, what made you? Can you, if it's all right, we can talk about the TED Talk again, like how you got invited again to it.
So what it was, I think, the TED Foundation. It's an NGO, and they have partnerships. So they have a program that partners with different companies. I think they did one with Google, Dell, all these big US company names. And they did one with the company that I worked for. And the culmination of that partnership was going to be this conference. So initially, they were asking employees working stateside for submissions. But something changed, and eventually what they did was they opened it up to the entire enterprise. So employees, regardless of where you're sitting. And so when we got the mailer, my colleague was excited about it, and she was telling me, "You should give this a shot." And I was like, "What am I going to do there, right?" And besides, public speaking is terrifying. But then I remember that time I just seen the movie Milk, which was a movie that won Sean Penn an Oscar for Best Actor. So it's about the first openly gay male politician elected to office in San Francisco, Harvey Milk. His life, and he got assassinated. So I guess that makes for really good drama. But it was also really well made and very touching, and also encapsulated the atmosphere, political atmosphere, at least at the time that Harvey Milk was alive. This was the 1980s, I think. So a little before the AIDS epidemic, or right when that was blowing up. And there were a lot of lines and scenes there that moved me. I am naturally, interested about social movements. And so I was reading up on his life and what the activism looked like at the time. And so when I got through all that, it got me thinking, what was it like here in the Philippines? Because I'd never really ventured into finding out. And then I came across this wonderful book by Dr. J. Neil Garcia. He teaches at UP Diliman. So the book is Philippine Culture. It's in the footnotes, I believe, of my TED Talk. And it was a wonderful read, fascinating, illuminating, liberating. And after I'd gone through all that, I decided to, read up a little more. And I discovered that the homosexuality, I'll put that in air quotes, is something that's always existed. It's not always been stigmatized, and there's a lot of cultures who, even have this as part of their social fabric. It wasn't seen as a degradation of social and moral values or anything like that. And so, to me, that was validating, and I thought that was an interesting idea, an idea that was worth sharing with the world. And so I did send in a submission based off of that inspiration. I got shortlisted, went through, an interview with the 10 curators. And then maybe after four weeks, I got the email that I was going to be part of the 13 speakers speaking at the conference in North Carolina.
So part of your advocacy is, apart from educating people about yung acceptance ng homosexuality since nung unang panahon pa, what other aspects or things are you doing to advocate this certain issue?
Yeah. So I am part of the Pride Employee Resource Network. I mentioned previously that the company I work for was founded in San Francisco and headquartered in San Francisco. So they've always been very supportive about that. I'm proud to say that it's one of the more progressive companies in the sense that they recognize domestic partnerships, and the HMO, part of the benefits that employees would get is you can use the HMO for gender affirming procedures. The insurance would extend to a domestic partner, even though, the Philippine law does not provide for that kind of benefit. The other thing is that during the pandemic, I started this online discussion support group, because one of the things that I really realized is that there's not a lot of people that queer folks can talk to about, how to gay or how to queer. I mean, you can talk to your parents if your parents or friends are supportive, but they don't have like clues, how to navigate the relationship, how to find, a partner, all the issues that come with that. And we would do that on a monthly basis. Some of the topics that, and we talk about anything, we talk about careers. How's it like to be a working professional and gay, for example, and I find that if you're in a multinational corporation, chances are you're going to be okay. But if you work for a local company or maybe, a local business, we've heard stories about people being passed up for a promotion because they're gay, and gay is synonymous with weak or not being, a strong leader or a strong manager. And that's just ridiculous to me, because in the company that I work for, we have strong, visible queer leaders.
Is that in the Philippines, the one you mentioned?
It is in the Philippines.
Meron palang ganun pa rin hanggang ngayon. I mean, well, at least could you say like what particular field was that? Like what type of company were doing that?
So it was one of the participants, and they shared their story. We didn't pry, because our mantra is to share what you're only comfortable sharing. All right. So it's sometimes like maybe a vent group, if you want to vent. And you don't, the participants don't really have to say, or ask for what, unless the participant volunteers that information, then there's really not much. So we didn't get the chance to ask what particular industry that is, but I would imagine that, based off of the story that was shared, that it's still a thing. What else? So that was called the Metro Manila Gay Men's Salon. And it's patterned after the I think 17th century European tradition of artists and thinkers congregating in a salon or in a place of it's a social gathering. You talk about ideas. But so we had that. We would also have like people talking about, or one of our discussions also had, are you thinking about your life in your later years and caring for parents? One of the stories or points that was brought up was, it seems like by default, if you're queer, it becomes your responsibility to care for your aging parents, because parang wala ka namang asawa, wala ka namang anak, parang ganon. So yun, parang hindi naman sila nagrereklamo, pero parang it's because they understand, but there's a hint of, I guess, being upset and frustration. I also have a life. Okay, parang given na wala akong asawa or wala akong anak, but why do I have to parang be the sole caregiver for our parents when it should be as much of a responsibility, as siblings than it is of me.
Right. And I think it's a good thing na you're also part of this organization, right? Kasi I want to ask you, based on your experience and sa mga narinig mo sa mga experience ng mga guests or mga people who approach you, what are the unfair or mga homophobic, I would say, that society is doing up until now?
Mm, so siguro a big piece of that would be marriage equality. So it doesn't matter how long you've been with your partner. In the eyes of the law, if there's an emergency, uh, it's the family that you're related with by blood who gets to make your medical decisions, right? So, and the implications of that is because one, if you're queer, then there's a fat chance that you might be estranged from your family. So imagine talking this out with your partner, and then maybe you both decided, nah, if worst comes to worst, it's okay to pull the plug on me, and then that decision and agreement between consenting adults gets overridden by parents who has shunned you for years, right? So that just seems ridiculous to me. And then the other is when it comes to inheritance, right? I mean, as partners, and if you live together for a while, you've worked and built towards stuff, properties and all that. So the law still, and I'm not saying that I'm saying this as a non-lawyer, but based on my understanding is that what the law says is that your properties would still go to your next of kin, and it disregards the amount of time that you've spent with your partner. So top of mind, there are probably loopholes around it, legal loopholes or alternatives that you can do, but that entails money, and then if you don't have money, then you're shit out of luck. Parang ganun. I'm sorry, can we swear on this podcast?
Yes. Okay. Walang
Okay,
dito.
okay.
Walang filter.
Walang censorship. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then the other is siguro the third piece is children. If you think you're ready to raise kids, there's a whole amount of roadblocks that you would have to go through, and that's not even accounting for the social stigma aspect of it.
Social stigma, what do you mean by
social? Like if a kid were to enroll, and then people find out that your parents are same-sex partners, so I can just imagine the bullying and the not unless siguro you can afford to send your kids to maybe a progressive school or a private school, international school, where that is seen as more normal, and people would be less likely to bat an eye. But if it's a public school, I don't know how that's going to go over. It probably won't go over so well.
Right. Pero yung sinabi mo na, so yung next of kin mo ang they will likely inherit yung money. Wala pang work around dyan? I mean, hindi like up until now, hindi ba yan pwede ma-overrule na you get to decide who you want to give your money?
As far as I know, wala. Unless siguro, I mean, I haven't looked into it that much, but I would imagine that if you have the resources, if money talks a lot in this country, so there's probably a way to get around it. But it's not gonna be accessible to people who just have enough, kumbaga.
And I guess I have to ask you lang kasi minsan during the conversation nakakalimutan na. What about yung mga issues I've heard like from the well, I'm not sure if may issue na ganun dito sa Philippines, maybe. About in the restrooms, like is it okay with, I mean, in the Philippine context, or is it acceptable na ba na you guys go to male or female, or I don't know.
I think that's more a trans issue than it is specifically gay. Because how I identify as a male individual, so I use the male restroom and all that. But what I will say, I mean, the trans individual could probably talk, better than I can. But I will say that the company I work for, there are all gender restrooms provided. Anyone can use them. People can come to work dressed according to how they identify as. It's a non-issue. The other piece I would say is that in our own homes, hindi segregated yung banyo natin. So everyone uses the same bathroom, right? And then another is what I often hear when the trans restroom issue comes up is there's danger of women or little girls being violated or sexually assaulted. And it just makes me think, one, if a person were to sexually assault or violate a woman, I don't think they're gonna go through the parang whole charade of dressing up as a woman. That takes so much work, and it sounds impractical. Secondly, is I have friends who are social workers. The vast majority of assault, rape that happens are actually perpetrated by family members or people that the family knows. So it's just to me it reads it's more fear mongering,
right?
Than and maybe people are well, I understand people are emotional, and they don't want to parang they want to cover all their bases, but it's just to me it's parang looking at the issue the wrong way, kumbaga.
Yeah, tama no, kasi yung so far sa mga naririnig ko sa mga news, it's usually yung mga stepfather or mga uncle yung gumagawa ng mga crimes na ganun.
Yeah, and there's statistics about that.
Right.
Actually, children often being prostituted by their own parents, which parang brings a dilemma to the kid, diba? Na parang, do you want to prosecute your parents? Siyempre hindi, diba? Because when you're a kid, your parents are your everything, and it's also really unfair na parang at such a young age, the kid is pressed to make such a life-altering decision.
What about yung, sorry, have pardon lang for my kasi I want to dig into this lang kasi I
go for it.
What about yung issues I think this is more sa West, but I'm not sure kasi sa again dito sa context sa Philippines. What about yung issue ng mga pronouns? Is that something na is being talked about here sa ating society?
So I think one is that, or the way I see it, and also my company, you can indicate on your profile, on your email, on your social, on Teams, because we use Teams as a means of communication. You can indicate your pronouns. It's encouraged. It's not a requirement, But people, I've seen people use it. Personally, the way I see it is that it's akin to a nickname. If you're Lionel, and then you say, but just call me Dong or Dodong. I'm gonna call you Dodong because that's what you're telling me. I'm not gonna be like I think it's courtesy for me. It's not a big deal. I wouldn't go out of my way to say, nah, I prefer calling you Lionel because you already told me that you prefer to be called Dodong. Why would I not call you by what you just said? So one, I think it's a matter of courtesy. Having said that, I recognize that to some people, this is a fairly new ground, and we can't expect everyone to be able to pick up on it right away. And then there's also this thing about neo pronouns, like Zir, and
Yes.
it's hard, there's a learning curve. So I think that both sides would benefit from extending grace, so long as the person comes from a place of good intentions. There's no malice. A lot of these things can be resolved by being understanding about each other, because they may be encountering it for the first time, right? But in terms of someone wanting or using, a preferred pronoun, I personally don't have an issue with it. I see it as someone parang nickname, someone having a name that they prefer people to call them by. Like if you're a junior and you want to be called JR, instead of Lionel, then okay, I'll call you JR.
Right. Pero what about yung the sentiments of the community itself? Do they get offended by if you don't call them by certain pronouns? I mean, dito sa Philippines, or what they generally don't care, man.
Siguro what I will say is that within the LGBT community, there's a spectrum. So the LGBT community is not a monolith, and what I mean when I say that is, it's not a group that thinks the same way. So politically, you will have your kakampinks, you will have your DDSs, and everything else. So even with trans folks, there's people who would say, they don't care, call me whatever you like. And some are a little more sensitive to that, I guess. Maybe because of their experience. It really differs. I find that from speaking with my trans friends, it's okay to ask, rather than if you don't know, what they go by. You can ask them what their preferred pronoun is, or you can, since kung Bisaya, you can just say siya or mamsir, the universal, I guess, gender neutral terminology.
Pero yun rin, no, kasi ang mga Pinoy is generally parang mahiyain. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the word maikog in Bisaya. So parang gano'n, no, parang maikog sila to ask. Like if they see a gay person or transgender, parang I guess mahiya na sila to tanong, what should I call you, ma'am? So they assume na lang ma'am, sir, gano'n. So yeah, I'm just curious lang sa general sentiments.
Sentiment. Ako, sometimes kung dili ko sure, I would say, oy, kanang kuan ba? Unsa ganito, and I would parang not use a pronoun at all siguro,
Right.
Bisaya. Or if I see them as parang female presenting, then I would be more comfortable calling them miga. Miga, ano sa ganyan ko?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's ganun rin sa generally dito sa even sa Cebu. Yeah, so I want to go to I want to ask you about yung sa of course about sa culturally yung sa ancestors natin what they thought about yung ganito yung homosexuality. But first for educational purposes, ano na ba yung mga abbreviations ngayon? Is it LG? Kasi alam ko LGBTQ plus. So is there other, like how extensive ba yung abbreviation right now? I have no idea na kasi.
Okay. It depends actually, and I think there's no fault in maybe using LGBT plus, or because the plus is to try and account for everything else that may be out there, or the most letters that I've seen is LGBTQIA.
What's
So
I and A?
I stands for intersex.
Ano yun?
So intersex are people born with both the male and female anatomy.
I see.
And then asexual would be people who don't have like a need
Sexual
for
urges?
sex. Yeah, no sexual urges. That's right. So that's the most letters that I'd seen, LGBTQIA plus. But I don't think you're gonna be crucified if you use, LGBT, LGBTQ. Those are perfectly acceptable acronyms.
So we can move on na lang yung sa about you mentioned it was already in our culture way back pa. Before that, may I know where do you get your sources about this, yung mga babaylan? Kasi this is also something na I'm curious about, and where exactly will you get this information? Kasi parang yung kung internet lang, I kind of have parang doubts about the validity kung simply from the internet.
Sure. So there's been a lot of anthropologists. So anthropology is the study of cultures across history. So several anthropologists have actually made papers about this. So one that I can think of and was also sourced dun sa, or nasa footnote din ng TED ko, is Carolyn Brewer. And then there's also Dr. Jamie Garcia. Several things have been written about the babaylans. I think there was Sister, I forget her name, but I think she used to teach at Saint Sco in Scholastica. Yeah, so there's several academic papers about the existence of same-sex social, bonding and the babaylans in particular. I can send you the link.
Yes,
if you want.
They got their information way back sa maybe Spanish era.
Correct. So the thing with us, our culture, is that we weren't really keen about writing down our practices, as opposed to maybe European civilization.
Exactly. Yes.
They would write everything. I think we did. There's evidence that we did a bit of writing, but when our ancestors did, they did it on bamboos, and it's biodegradable. So over time, it's gonna rot, and we are more of an oral tradition. That's how our cultures get passed. And so, to your point, yes, a lot of the anthropological studies done, at least in the Philippine context, because maybe other cultures wrote about their practices. So in the Philippine context, it was really looking at uh, the narratives that the Spanish wrote about the people living in our archipelago when they came. Um, the name escapes me at the exact name escapes me, but it was Father Alcina. I think it was something about the Visayan Islands. Bantayan was mentioned, um, and Father Alcina had an observation about this, certain person who was a bailan, and the role that this person played in the community, and who was or were the objects of this person's affection. So that included that, and so specifically about gender, these are mentioned in those texts. I haven't had a chance to read the exact manuscript because one, I can't read Spanish. But Neil Garcia is one of those people who went to Europe and actually studied the actual manuscript. And there's a few other written events, or no, sorry. There's a few other commentaries by different people, different places, different time periods, and they all seem to support each other in their observations when it comes to the cultural practices. So that's mainly siguro from an anthropological standpoint. That's a source.
Right. And itong mga babailan is, I guess, mostly are women, but there were several, as you mentioned, yung sa earlier na were both male and female, and they were looked up on as they were considered like higher up in the societal rankings.
Yeah, correct. It was really centered around the babaylan. So there was one Filipino writer who parang pushed forward a thesis na ours was more of a matriarchal society as opposed to the West's patriarchal society.
Right. And sorry, Franz, just to give context lang, who were the babaylans noon?
So the babaylans were they played many roles, kumbaga. So they're a leader, a spiritual leader. Now for a society who worshipped and believed in spirits, so this was a central figure sa community. They would go to this person for healing, for wisdom, and it's not siguro just because if you're a babaylan, you're trained for it. It's a role that you train for your entire life. You dedicate your life to it. So you have to know your herbs, you have to know your potions, you have to know your spirits. So it's a big deal, kumbaga. Maybe siguro I would think of it as some sort of an administrative position, maybe a governor, but for spiritual affairs. So that's how central the babaylan was in terms of the pre-colonial societies. Now, what was I going to say? So you're correct. Mostly women, and going back to what I said earlier, ours was more of a matriarchal society because it was more equal in terms of what how men and women are seen, as opposed to the West. na the man is the central figure, and then the woman is subservient. If you go way back, the woman is the property of the man, right? And then the woman's business is the kitchen. They don't get a say in important matters. Diba? Parang hush, woman. The men are talking. Parang ganun. So it wasn't like that in pre-colonial Philippine societies.
Pero there was a ano naman no, maybe a division lang sa like sa work.
Mm-hmm.
Pero ang treatment nila is more or less the same.
Yeah. I would agree. Roles, there were still roles, right?
Yes.
But in terms of treatments, I would agree with you na more or less the same nga yung treatment sa babae and sa lalaki.
And this was what year noon? Around what year?
So I think the 1590 at the dumating, if I'm not mistaken. I hope my history teacher does not crucify me. I've never been good with dates, but around that time, siguro 1590 dumating yung Spanish. And so they might have seen this. They might have already observed this, as soon as they came, and wrote it down. And then early colonial years, it was still, a thing. One of the interesting passages that I'd read, because they were trying to convert the land into Christianity, diba? I would read the passage here, but I could not find the exact page. But it said something about kumpisal, right? So if your confession, right? One of the parang passages that the natives were asked to confess is that did you lie with another man? Which I think was interesting. Why would you specifically ask someone to confess if you lay with another man? But yeah, if they mentioned it, it may have been so common and in the eyes of the Spanish friars, a problem enough that would merit it being a specific confession.
You mean so they were asking confession from the natives? So in majority they would say that they had.
I don't know if they would say that they had. I guess what I'm trying to say is that because diba, confession is a sacrament, you would confess your sins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because if you can correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a while since I don't done my religious thing, but the way confession works is that you confess your sins, and then the priest is gonna work with you to hopefully cleanse your sin. I think that's how it works, right?
Right.
So what I'm saying is that it merit parang
the fact that it was an parang considered as a sin. Well, I guess they were so parang fundamentalist na they were so dogmatic about the Bible or their interpretation at least.
Right. And the other piece is that you could ask people to confess about a million other sins, but why hone in on the fact that the man might have lay down with another man, I guess. So maybe, or maybe this is speculation, but I don't think it's unreasonable to think that the practice was so common or common enough it would merit its own line in the confession booklet.
What about sa babae? They don't ask them that?
So nothing was I suppose written about So that's also an interesting point, actually, because there's not much written about female to female na relationship. And my thinking is that, at least from a Western point of view, uh, female to female affection is okay.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Whereas male to male affection is not okay. So
Right.
that's probably one of the reasons why they were not scandalized by. I would like to think that that also existed, but they were not scandalized as much as they were observing male to male affection.
Right. And say you mentioned babaylan were like the administrators of spirituality. So I guess at that time, tama ba na yun yung time ng mga datu, right? Datu, the one who led the tribe. So wala namang, how come this issue was more on towards the babaylans? Well, not an issue, but this situation was more common in the babaylans rather than any other roles in the society. Like maybe a datu na homosexual or something.
I don't have parang a straightforward answer. I think it's more the belief na parang spirituality comes naturally to a woman than it does to a man. I could be wrong. Feel free to fact check me, but I think that's part of the roles, kumbaga, na we talked about earlier. There were still roles. The spiritual realm was a role that was more relegated to a woman. That does not mean that a man could not be it, which is why there were male babaylans, but more often than not, the woman had more affinity to spirituality.
Mm-hmm. And aside from this culture, this aspect about babaylans, are there other citations na homosexuality already existed before?
Are you talking about the Philippine context or parang
Yes.
in other places? So citations, I think it's really mostly this goes back to the fact that our ancestors really did not write, and the way they would pass on traditions and cultural aspects of their community is orally. So really the main source of understanding is through what's written by the Spanish missionaries, kasi sila yung masipag magsulat. And there's also caveats nga doon sa, by the Filipino and other anthropologists have written about this. Now, when you're reading through the manuscript, is try to have a critical eye, kasi yung point of view ng mga manunulat would be their point of view. In other words, they're bringing with them their
prejudice,
the prejudice that comes with it. Yung morally what's right and what's wrong. So parang keep that in mind lang din daw when you're reading through it, if you manage to read it.
Yeah, makes sense kasi ano naman talaga, part naman talaga ng propaganda machine sa mga any culture, no? So apart from yun, France, reference to yung sa ancestral aspects on this particular situation, any other references na wala mo na mention sa TED Talk that would support this advocacy that you mentioned? Maybe like in a scientific sense or yeah.
So siguro one thing that I was fascinated by, and I didn't include this, of course, because it's not my parang it's not something that I've really delved into. And so there's this TED Talk, 13 minutes, and it's so the title is "The Biology of Gender from DNA to the Brain." It was a talk that was given by her name. She's a biologist. Her name is Carissa Sanbonmatsu. So I thought it was fascinating. She talked about epigenetics. And my understanding is that epigenetics is a branch of social neuroscience. And what it looks at is how external factors affects the DNA. So applications include aging, degenerative disease, so mga ganon. And then I think what was fascinating to me is that according to her, or epigenetics, is that there are, or environmental and behavioral factors can influence our DNA and aging and all that. I don't think it's a hot take to say na stress can age a person significantly, or significant stress can age a person significantly. I don't know if you agree or not, but I think it's well established, right? Parang, if you're significantly stressed, it manifests in your body.
Right.
So what the science is saying though is that aside from stress, other parang cultural and behavioral activities can also like, say for example, aging. It can decrease or increase how quickly a person ages. Ano ba itong mga factors na to? Physical activity, feeling of being supported, having a good social culture, good social circle rather, can impact a person's longevity. And then that also so I would say that there's a lot that's unknown about epigenetics and to what extent, because we can't manipulate aging yet. But the thesis was that, so apparently, because the DNA and then the things that are around it, naapektuhan din siya ng, so the thesis is that if external factors can affect your DNA, to what extent ba yung, for example, feeling supported for your parang gender identity, could that be also a factor?
Right.
Another thing that was mentioned is that a child's development in the womb, first trimester daw, it's the parang the body something is determined, and then yung the brain, and I guess this I may not be explaining this well, but my understanding is that the brain and the body or the anatomy does not develop at the same time, but on first trimester and then second trimester. So if maybe the mother is exposed to stress or trauma on the second trimester, then there's a chance that they may not be, or it may develop differently. Kumbaga, the path that it's taking is going to take a different course. But that's interesting to me. Because there's a debate, right, about how gender is determined, and there are two schools of thought when it comes to this. One is gender essentialism, which says that gender is determined by innate or inherent biological characteristics,
Right.
right?
Right.
What's in between your blah 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 and hormones and chromosomes and all that. The second school of thought is, I think the constructivist na yun nga, social
Social
norms,
construct. Yep.
correct? That's what determines gender. Personally, I think the truth may be somewhere in the middle.
Right.
And with epigenetics, that may be even more proof that
Yes.
you can't go one way, just one way or the other, and that it may be a combination of both. To what extent, we don't know yet, because there's still a lot that
Yeah, I think kasi isn't that where the word meme comes from, the memetics, right? Like the non-genetical transmission of cultural behavior sa society. So I think I came across a video where scientists were talking about, I think ito nga yung epigenetics, wherein I'm not sure if I got this right, na yung example nila, like a certain monkey, a group of monkeys, na how they got to learn to use tools, I think. So once I think yung genes ng certain species, it would gravitate towards yung parang more, how do you say, more prominent, much more stronger na genes, but this is from affected by yung non-genetical transmission. So yun nga, yung mga behavioral. So it gets passed on sa genes nila, and then ma-propagate yun na type of genes throughout sa sa generation. So yeah, I guess meron talagang, I mean, it came full circle when I asked earlier, I guess, na is it more on genetics or more societal factors that affect this? No. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I haven't come across that meme, but yeah, I mean, I think I would tend to agree, because if my understanding of epigenetics is correct, is the thing around the DNA keeps rewriting itself depending on what you're exposed to.
Yes.
If I remember correctly, exposure to trauma can significantly alter parang genetics. And to your point, if taking the monkey example, for example, if yun nga, yung parang the monkeys were exposed to certain factors and they were able to pass that down, then I don't know, maybe that could be how evolution works. I don't know.
Yeah, kasi yung part rin pala ng study nila is more on you can't really blame people who are drug addicts, say for example drug addicts or may alcohol problems, kasi it's been passed. Well, I guess this is more towards the opposite, but you can't really blame them kasi this is passed towards sa genes nila. So this is yung mga ganon na you think these are also social construct, when in fact there are also some aspects of it na yung maybe father niya or already has this, so hindi niya ma-avoid to be also the same. Yeah. So yeah, apart from this, how extensive or maybe like how far along does your advocacy go or your study about this gender fluidity? Does it extend to other fields or studies?
Well, it's a journey naman. I think yung learning natin. So I'm constantly trying to see what it is that I can get a hold of in terms of advocacy. If I'm asked to speak out, I will speak up about it. There's a Pride March that's happening at UP Diliman next week, I think, June 28th. So I'll be there with my company, show force and show support. And we have these conversations, all the time with my friends. I've been fortunate in the sense na parang early on, I've gotten that acceptance from them. So it's really solidified, kumbaga, my belief in myself. And like I said, kahit sa work, if I'm even at the workplace, if people ask me to participate or speak up, I will do it. But it's not my thing, kumbaga, na parang public speaking or going on tours.
Right.
So I have a full-time job, kumbaga. But any chance that I get, if there's a person that's willing to listen, I'll tell them.
Right. And based sa sa experience mo, obviously with this type of yung sa LGBT, what's your projection or outlook towards this particular issue, societal issue? Like, is it going on the right direction on your end, or is there like significant pushback from the maybe conservatives?
I think we've made progress, man. I think we've made progress. I don't know if 20 years ago, like companies would even, speaking as someone who's worked in the private sector, I can't think of domestic partnerships, being recognized and having benefits extended to them. So there's some progress. Kumbaga sa Tagalog nga, malayo pa pero malayo na.
What would be, if I may ask lang, what would be your ideal, in a perfect world, what would be your ideal condition setup, yes, for the whole society?
So one, I would like marriage equality in the Philippines. Ironically enough, the country who religion remains to be parang a strong force of opposition. And ironically enough, the country that gave us this religion, Christianity, actually has marriage equality. So I don't know. Hindi ko alam how people are able to rationalize that. But ideally, I hope to see that happening in my lifetime, so that kung sino man yung whoever wants that for themselves and for their family can have it without having to go through, without having to need massive amount of resources, and it's not even the same thing.
Right. So it's more towards yung marriage talaga ang big na chunk, the issue sa ano ngayon.
For me personally, yes.
Yes. Right. And maybe last question na lang, Frads. Do you still feel some degree of discrimination to society these days?
Siguro I'll caveat by saying that I come from a place of privilege in the sense na parang I work a relatively cushy job. I live in an urban center, right? So my experience may not encapsulate the experience of the greater queer Filipino community. Personally, not much, and maybe that's owing not to where I'm sitting in society. I think in the Philippine setting, the issue, especially with your economic class, is more of a problem. May sinasabi nga, and this was shared in one of our sessions na parang sinabihan daw siya na pag magiging bakla ka, siguraduhin mong marami kang pera. And that to me parang the implication is that uh, it's a very classist society. Kasi nga naman, kung may pera ka, is you have cushion, you're insulated, you have a shield, you know, from all the other discrimination that you could possibly face. So I guess it's a long-winded way to say that there still exists a lot of disparities, and I hope na parang the money is not gonna be, at the very least, you know, a barrier for people in same-sex relationships and loving who they want to love.
If this conversation has sparked new interest and questions for you, consider subscribing to this channel, and I'll bring you more insights from science, philosophy, arts, and more.